to call the Prime Minister. Okay, so now I'm very proud to call the Prime Minister to open the debate. Woo!
Okay, just a second. Okay. Great. So, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The main thing we want to show in this debate is that the signaling of giving the reparations to the families, to giving the settlements, will be something that will help the United States to solve the border crisis in a much better way, and thus giving a better quality of life to much more people. But first of all, we'll talk about how those reparations are really settlements for real psychological harms that were done to innocent people or people that didn't choose to be part of it. And then we'll talk about the signaling of United States, Mexico, and other countries across the border. So let's talk about first what situation we are talking about. We are talking children were separated from their families, actually having to live without their parents in camps or like people, places for like jailed persons. We think those kids were were really like innocent and had to bear to like have the psychological harms of being separated from their parents, which is very traumatic for a child and very bad for them. Before I continue, yes, so clarification.
How much money for each family, please?
We think we would want to first of all help them like have psychological treatments, maybe build a home for them. This is not so much families, so not so much money. It will not be so expensive for us. We think because these children and actually people are innocent. Why are they innocent? Because they were put in a situation where the only logical thing for them is try to get to the other side, try to get to the United States. And they were forced actually to do so. Of course, they and when they did so, they couldn't think that what will happen is them being separated from their children. It is not something that they could predicted. We say we have the moral obligation as the side that did this thing that actually was unjustified to give them those settlements in order to really try to be like to give them some benefits because of the situation we put them in. We think this is like very logical and good. Okay, so let's talk about the important thing, because we think in the long run, we want to make sure that the things across the border will be better for all of us. Why is this? Because this is not like a policy motion. It's not an actor motion, meaning that we want to make the whole area much better. We want to make people's life better in generally. How does the Biden administration seems like and signals to be facing the border crisis? What is their the things they're doing? Well, we think Biden has yet really like stated the things he's gonna do in order to solve the border crisis. We say it is kind of a continuation of the Trump administration, and in the sense that there were not concrete things that he said or concrete plans that he had to really do something differently. Why is this so important in the world we live in today? We say in an ideal world, we would want the border crisis to be dealt with differently. We would want some kind of policy change, meaning that maybe, first of all, just like return back all of the family and not to keep the children there. We say this is very, very bad. The second thing we would love to see are like long-term contracts with Mexico, in Mexico by the United States. We want to see a real change in Mexico, meaning that the economy it will prevent people from actually wanting to cross the border to the United States, or at least have less incentives to do so. We would want to see more like trying to overcome the crimes and the criminals that enable this movement between the borders in the first place, or maybe investment in Mexico, which will make the life of people that lives there a little bit more sufferable. And we say this is the change we would want to see in the world. So why wouldn't it happen today? Because we say that the crime that the United States government has made of actually separating children from their parents is so horrible. It's so bad. It really stabs our heart. We say, how is that possible to be so evil? Children that are not even like 5 were separated in this thing. We say without the United States administration and the Biden administration recognizing the harms that were done to the people and signaling to Mexico government, listen, we want to change our ways. We want to have some contracts for the long term. We want to do things differently. It won't happen. We say this is exactly the signal we want to have, and no other signal could do something. Like, we can't stop building a wall, but we can recognize we did the harm and try to fix it. Yes, please.
Yes, Mexico has every interest today to already cooperate with the US. You just don't need it. Mexico happy to make contracts, stuff like that.
We don't think we really have this thing, because we say that today the United States looks like the absolute evil when it does this thing that is so immoral. Because this thing is exactly what we like don't want to do and have as a government. And also we say that when the United States does that, before it did that, the oil policy was still the Trump administration policy, meaning that it looks like there is no way of cooperating. More than that, it was a will to just build a wall and start and try separating between the two sides, which gave the Mexican administration, even if there is an incentive, no real hope for any cooperation between the two administrations. And as long as Biden administration won't try to do a signaling like that, there is no way of real cooperation. So we think only on the reparation side we win, but we also think that just by stating this is not okay, we can both give Mexican administration a reason to cooperate and also show that we really apologize for that. So for all those reasons, please propose.
Woo! I'd like to thank the speaker and call upon the leader of the opposition. Woo!
Hi, am I clearly audible and visible? Because those
yes, you are.
Great. Oh, that wasn't tasty at all. Oh, God. Okay. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Yael tells us that the United States should give migrants that run up to their borders with 300 hungry kids a house in the mountains and health insurance for them all. Imagine what Yael would say if she found out what happened to Palestinians who come with their kids and try to cross the border into Israel. We're going to have 2 points in this debate. First, the border crossers knew what would happen and chose their course of action. The separation was the natural way by the state to respond. And secondly, practically, this just costs too much political capital, coming at the expense of other more direct ways to aid these specific populations, as well as Biden's chances of getting reelected in general, which is a far greater harm to this population. Let's jump right into it. So, the people who did it carry the responsibility. We have no obligation to them. Why? Firstly, they came illegally. The United States accepts refugees. They don't accept migrants or immigrants. In order to make it fair for people around the world, there is a certain process. The process is defined by legal definitions set by international conventions. Now, this is morally legitimate to not just let any work migrant into your country, because otherwise countries cannot function. In other words, if it became known around the world that if you are poor, if you come from a country where there's crime and there's bad politicians and there's little respect for human lives, that you just get to live in the US now, then half of the populations of South America and Africa and Asia would get up and move there. Everyone would come, which makes this untenable. And that is why we don't support open borders, right? Therefore, it is legitimate to enforce this law that exists and is known and stop these people at the border. At that point, they can apply officially for asylum per international rule. But the thing is, many of these people have arrived after a horrible journey with no food for themselves and for their kids. They wanted better lives for themselves and for their kids. They could have known that they would be turned back. The thing is, they knew the potential consequences, and we know this for a fact, because this has been a long-term US policy since Clinton, right? These people decided to put themselves and their kids in jeopardy, doing a dangerous a dangerous journey, trying to sneak across international borders, poking a giant that is literally the strongest superpower in the world. And obviously they got caught like everyone does. And at that point, the United States accepted their kids as a humanitarian gesture. Because it is horrible to try to do the return process. They actually have bad chances to survive, and the US accepts that danger, right? So if their parents at the time are being taken into holding for trying to commit a crime, or if they're being turned back to their original state, if they're coming from a state that isn't deemed to be a location from which people can apply for refugee because it's not deemed to be a state of danger. For example, if they're Mexicans rather than being Salvadoran, or if they are being sent to wait while they apply for asylum, in each of these cases, the United States are willing to take and feed them and ensure that they have food and ensure that they don't die or freeze in the awful conditions outside. Now, if the parents don't come back, that is, if the parents just don't care about their kids, and this happens often because many of these parents just want their kid to be taken care of, then the United States makes sure that they get an education. If their parents come into the country or approach from their home countries, the United States, they get reunited with their kids. This is obviously a long process when hundreds of thousands of people attempt to illegally migrate. And this is especially difficult with people who don't have any IDs, kids who don't know any identifying information about their town or anything about their parents beyond their first names, who often don't even speak the same language as the people who are interviewing them. Most of the examples of kids who weren't returned for a long time and who were separated while their parents were actively searching for them were these kinds of cases. I'd be happy to take closing as soon as you have a POI. Now, think that they just don't have any obligation therefore to give back, because it is also the known legal precedent. Okay, the United States has harmed Native Americans, Black Americans, Cubans, Hawaiians, Filipinos, Afghanis, Iraqis, and so on, and no one got reparations because everyone knows, just don't mess with the Americans, right? It's like when my mother tells me don't try to fly to a different country with weed. Just don't question it, just don't do it. And if you do it, you get into trouble. I asked Nadav why he's okay with suing people in the army who smoke. He tells me I'm not suing them for smoking, I'm suing them for being dumb enough to get caught. And that makes plenty of sense. Now, the problem is that there's also practical harms to this, because in the future, the US won't even accept the kids, right? They'll force them back with their parents for lack of alternatives, because otherwise they are creating a precedent where if they separate you from the kids and try to take care of your kids while you are going through something dangerous because you are a criminal, then that means that they now owe you a house and education and citizenship, opening exactly the kind of floodgates that I described are likely, making it literally untenable. Therefore, opening government's case is just impossible and does not stand logically on its own. Before I get into the practical analysis, closing, do you have a POI for me? Opening, go ahead.
We think that the psychological harms for a kid to be separated from his parents, from his source of like confidence in the world, is so traumatizing that we have to pay something for these children.
I agree. I think that it is a bad experience. I think that the parents bring it upon the kid. I think that the parents choose that bad experience for the kid over a different alternative bad experience that the kid would have at home. I think that most kids around the world have a bad experience, whether they grew up in India or in Africa or in South America. I think that you could argue that the United States has an obligation to help all of those, in which case I'd say, sure. I also agree that the US should give foreign aid, but in order to do that, the US has to function as a tenable state, which it cannot do if it just has an influx of billions of refugees coming, which is literally what you are practically enabling with no mechanization of how you are able to prevent that. Okay, let's quickly analyze on how much political capital it costs for three main reasons. Firstly, because it's going directly against the prior president. While there is typically a norm of respecting the prior president in the United States elections, literally treating his actions as a crime and offering people reparations for what he did is a very, very strong stance that riles up many moderate and conformist and centrist Americans. Secondly, it sets reparations, which only 20% of Americans support because the vast majority see it as inherently antithetical to their country, which is capitalistic and libertarian and doesn't have direct aids and maybe gives people tax reductions and tax cuts, but it is an anti-social welfare state. And thirdly, Americans are just very weary of migrants, right? The lack of jobs, which is the main thing that the migrants come and desire and take. This is especially true in the states that are most crucial to win and in which political capital is most important, such as the Rust Belt and Southern purple states like Arizona and Nevada. The harms from this is, first of all, the ability to promote other more important agendas, such as fighting climate change, fighting racism, tackling corona, fighting jobs and infrastructure, reforming voting. Secondly, directly harms the ability to help migrants, right? Through, for example, making it easier for them to access higher education, to travel back between their home country and current country, even if they're not citizens, but just residents, etc. And finally, re-election, because it gives Trump a very, very strong playing card. Look, they are literally giving your money to Mexico. He was talking about Mexico will pay for it. Now they're paying for Mexico. I'm going to do the opposite of that. You should elect me again. And that's awful. For all of these reasons, I'm very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the speaker and call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. DPM.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Just a second. All right. Three, two, one. On two issues. Firstly, on the principle, why we think this is completely justified, why we think the original separation was unjustified, direct engagement with OO. Secondly, on why we think this will be much more beneficial in terms of Biden re-election, insofar as that is a metric that OO for some reason wants to promote. We will beat them on that metric as well. So let's start with what they give us here on the principle. Firstly, Ayal tell us that it is morally legitimate to let whoever you want in, and that therefore by this law it is morally legitimate to enforce border law. Couple of responses to this. We think that this should be the case, but this should be done humanely. That is to say, we don't want people to get hurt physically, mentally, psychologically, economically, educationally, more than they need to when the country chooses to enforce its policies. So firstly, we think that separation was not a Clinton policy. I'm just going to counter assert that that is true. But secondly, right, putting them in cages for weeks, maybe months, where they have no sufficient food like Ayal wants them to have, when they have less access to electricity, when they have no access to the outside world, we think is inherently inhumane, insofar as that is what the Trump administration did when they put the children in camps, when they had such a severe influx of people trying to come in. We say that this is, they would much rather just get everyone back rather than just to create worse off utility conditions for everybody. But thirdly, right, they say, oh, but it's better for these people, for these children to actually get separated because, that's what everybody wanted, right? We think here is that it is very important to know that the US government has much more information, much less biases as a bureaucratic body than an individual family that chooses to make that decision. That is to say, they have the responsibility to go against what these people want because because the government probably knows that that decision would have been much worse off. Let's weigh why that would be much worse off than just to let the children stay with their families, right? We think firstly, psychologically, there are many, many impacts of what happens, both on parents, which is probably less important, but also on the children themselves, as soon as they don't have a parental figure, right? As soon as we are ripping that away from them, as soon as they now don't have the emotional connection, they don't have the capacity to grow, they have less capacity to learn and to actually develop as human beings when we are ripping them off the people who are supposed to be educating them, when they get no attention, when they get put in cages from people, because you cannot just divert attention to all of these thousands of kids that have been inside of there, and we get no response to this from opening opposition. Secondly, economically, I think these kids, because they now have nowhere to work in, because now they basically have nowhere to go, and they also don't have citizenship, they just have way less capacity to actually find somewhere to work, rather than just being with their family that probably also already had some kind of income in their country. Maybe it was not the best, but they had something. They just thought the US would be better. And they had the optimism bias that when the parents would try to cross the border, I could get in. I would be one of those few people that could get in illegally. I could pretty much work it from there, right? At the point in which that doesn't happen, we think that the opportunities that are presented to these children, even if they're bad at Mexico, are severely more bad at the US, because no one will want to actually employ like illegal immigrant children, right? But thirdly, educationally as well, right? Because no one is there to pay for these like school and education in the US, because they have no one to take care of them, they're also very significantly be very much worse off in the comparative if we wouldn't have a better policy of like non-discrimination. What does this mean on Ayal's case, right? We say principally there has been a very significant immoral action by the state towards individuals, which means that the state is now the morally just action to do is to pay these reparations, which means that this is like principally the global better outcome. So we win on this point, right? Before I continue, I'd love to take CO. Oh, yes, go.
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah. No, CO.
In both worlds, the same families are still cut off and are still not together. Why does this compensation makes any delta?
Because repair the damages that have been done educationally, economically, and psychologically to these children. That's one. Two, now I'm going to explain why in the future this is much less likely to happen, therefore preventing the long-term kind of the big delta that you kind of want me to talk about, right? So let's understand. Firstly, I think at the point in which we get no engagement on Yael's analysis on why Biden will be forced to take a tougher stance, will be forced to make changes in his border policy, I think we're pretty clearly winning it here, right? Because what we're saying is essentially this. Politically, it will be impossible for Biden to continue the separation of families, because he knows that as soon as he pays these reparations, which we already explained in them of themselves are the best thing to do in this debate, he's not going to have the option to actually continue on and putting children in cages, separating families, etc. Because this would be a political disaster, right? All of the media will be on top of him saying, oh, look, he's so hypocritical. He pays reparations for what Trump has done, but he's doing the same thing himself, right? What we think is that this also inherently pushes Biden to make better policies that treat migrants much more humanely, therefore much more increasing the chances of re-election. Because notice what Ayal is telling you here. Firstly, it is bad to do like what another president has done. I mean, I don't know. Republicans and Democrats are changing regimes all of the time. Trump is pretty hated in the United States anyway, and he did the same thing to Obama as well. So I don't think anyone would mind it that significantly. But the important thing he says here is that, United States people are very wary of migrants. So a couple of things on it. Firstly, I think that those that are wary are not necessarily the ones that vote for him anyway, because inherently Republicans have a much tougher stance than Democrats on migration in the first place. But let's take this on the stronger side. And let's say, even if everyone is very wary of these migrants, we say, firstly, he gets votes of people that now see that he treats them more humanely, which is a big plus. But even if they don't care about that, they now get less children, which means they now get less migrants, which means that also the people who are anti-migrant are seeing that Biden makes significant changes in his policy, which means that we now have much better chances of getting even those anti-migrant people to vote for Biden, because there's just less of them numerically inside of the United States. Thank you.
Woo! I'd like to thank the speaker and call upon the member of the opposition.
Just a second. Okay. I will start in 3, 2, 1. We will explain why this compensation will lead to backlash that will, 1, harm immigrants and minorities, and 2, bring the second coming of Trump. So all the teams here want to prove that the Republican Party is very, very bad and it shouldn't be elected again. We will do our best to show how this is exactly what's going to happen with the motions. All my rebuttals will be with Amitai. So to my first point, backlash from Southerners. So the situation in the border right now between Americans is one of competition, fear, and hate. And why is this? Immigrants are perceived as being a threat for those Southerners' way of living, for their financial abilities. Those that are good immigrants, that are good people, that just want to make a better life for themselves, are considered competition for jobs. And those that are criminals, so they steal, they murder and all that, they are considered the bad guys that are running from the law in their country and coming into America to wreak havoc. So today, even without the compensations, the Southerners feel like they are neglected, like they are unseen in their own country. Why is this true? Because this is why Trump was elected to begin with, because he tapped into those feelings, because some of them are not educated, they do not stand with the technology changes, and they cost too much to take as workers, so they have more competitions from these immigrants. And also because there is no social safety net in the United States, and this is part of what makes America great, right? Because people have more freedom than they have the government poking into their business. So they don't have the social safety net, but they also don't kind of want it. What happens with the settlements? They see that the same country that doesn't have a social safety net for them now has some kind of social safety net, financial safety net for immigrants that are coming illegally, that are stealing their jobs, that are bringing a lot of terror into their neighborhoods, and they get compensated, because as long as you bring a baby with you to the border, you might get paid by the American government. This is a great incentive for immigrants to come. This is what's called giving a present to someone who broke into your house. Okay, so they will feel even more neglected, the Southerners, because they are not being helped. The situation in the border is not being fixed. And the first government did not give us any mechanisms to how this might fix the situation in the border. They gave something very unclear about maybe this will create more a cooperation with the Mexican government, but it's not very clear how that's going to happen. So what's going to happen from this? People that feel neglected and helpless in the South, they will feel like they have absolutely no control over their country. They will become even more extremist, and this will lead to violence, okay? This will lead to a very, very violent and neglected population. Like we know, maybe Ock will say that, well, all the violent people will probably get incarcerated, because the minute they are violent, the police will take care of them. Okay, so we might incarcerate a very large population from the American people. Maybe that will solve the problem, but what will happen to those that are not violent, but they are still extremists, because now they feel even more fearful for their life, for their livelihood, and they don't see how the Biden administration takes care of them first. Okay. So, they will probably become more extremist, and they will probably end up showing it on election day. I don't know why the second government thinks that this will give an incentive to Democratic voters to vote Democratic. Okay, we know that satisfaction doesn't lead to more action. If anything, being unsatisfied, feeling helpless is what leads people to action. This is exactly what got Trump elected elected in the first place. And this is exactly what will get him elected again, because people feel even more helpless. They feel like money is being taken away from their country to pay for someone who is a criminal. Okay, so like we've explained, many people could perceive the immigrants as being a threat to them. So if Biden gives them this settlement, he is considered a traitor of his country. Why is this important? Okay, swing states are the people who choose who gets elected in America. Okay, many times it really falls on the swing states to decide who gets elected. This is what happened in the past 2 elections at least. Okay, and what we think is that if the extreme people become more extremist, we think that the people in the center will probably become a little bit more extreme too, because immigrant is a real problem in America. And if it's conceived as in, if it's perceived as, you know, we'll treat you to more money just because you came with a child and now you get to get compensations, more people will become more extreme. They will look at Trump policy and they will say, well, you know what, we don't really like separating children from their parents, but if the comparative is to give them a bunch of money just because they came with children, well, then I guess I got to pick Trump again, because at least he's taking action. At least he has my back on this. I will take second house. Yes.
Yes, CO like OO don't feel the burden of proving why this motion will tip the scales. They somehow make more Republicans vote for Trump or make them violent. They never show you why this specific motion will steer their hearts and drive them to action.
Thank you. I think I understand. And we'll say that we rely on the concession we get from opening government about how this will be this was considered only Trump's policy. And now when we give compensation, we think this will be conceived as, you know, American policy. And from now on, this will be the standard. We will have to pay people. And I don't think that Americans really want to give money out of their pockets. Americans are not big for charity, for people who take their jobs or don't do enough to support themselves. So we think this is how it's going to happen. Now, why is this so important? Because like we said, people in swing states that are moderate, they can perceive this as being a legitimate hagana on their independence. So this will impact the people who are moderate. They will probably vote for Trump because Biden is considered okay. Thank you.
Ooh. I'd like to thank the speaker and call upon the opposition whip.
Me? Cool. I will start in 3, 2, 1. Okay. I'm going to talk about 2 things in my speech. First of all, I'm going to talk about the meaning of this compensation in the eyes of the Mexicans and explain why it's really an important point in a debate. Secondly, I'm going to talk about what are the real impacts that are happening after this motion and why we have proven the real damages that are happening as a result of this debate. Before that, 1 point of rebuttal. So the whole case of the closing government rests only on the assumption that people or Democrats people don't like Biden because he, I don't know, outdated or something like that. So here are some things that explain why it is unlikely. What Trump did, he destroyed the justice system, he destroyed, I don't know, the elections, millions who died because of the corona. We think these things are strong enough not to support Trump, and even a slightly less outdated candidate, they will be more probably to vote him. Even if they will vote to the Republicans in the Congress, it is still unlikely that they will vote for this person after all these phenomenons. And this is a huge second government burden that we don't think that they approve. Let's talk firstly about the meaning of these compensations and why they are simply not important in this debate. Because let's talk about the strange discussion that we had in the opening house with whether these compensations are legitimate. We really think these things are really irrelevant to the debate. Why is it? 2 reasons. Firstly, we think that no matter how much compensations would bring to them, still those children suffer a lot of psychological suffering in both sides. According to OG's analysis, we think that once you break up with your mother as a small child, when you get cash, that is supposed to compensate for it, you really don't feel anything. We think the suffering from the fact that you're not with your parents now, and the hard memory of the moment when you and the parents separated by force will remain on both sides. We don't think there is a analysis on why this specific damage is so huge and why this is the tipping point that going to decrease and mitigating all of the suffering because of the money that we don't know what is the meaning for them specifically. Secondly, we think that even if we buy all of the impacts of the opening government, and they're really right that this money will have them in a lot in the future, it is just really negligible compared to the damages that that happened if Trump elected or not elected. Because what are we telling you? The questions whether Trump will be elected tomorrow or not is the most important questions. Why is that? Because like opening house and all of the room agreed that we don't want him to be elected, but mainly because if he's elected, there is much more likely there will be much more damages that OG claimed that was happening. But we say more than that, we'll just see far-reaching impacts on the whole system that we just see it like harming the justice system, like all of these conspirators and all of those stuff like the COVID crisis and all of those stuff are much more likely. So we think that all of these discussions are really, really not relevant. Now, before I move on to what is relevant, I will take opening.
Yeah, so even if there's a bit of short-term backlash, this is probably okay because it steers centered people away from Trump so they don't support the violence. And we already showed there will be less illegal migrants.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is my second point, so I'll just answer that in my point right now. Now, where am I? Okay, let's talk about the real impacts that follow this motion, which actually we're proving. Because opening government says that the citizens of the United States will like it because they will suddenly, see Biden referring to immigrants, etc. The opening opposition says that the citizens of the United States hate immigrants in general. We think that even though there was a lot of analysis on both sides, both groups really missed the debate on two very, very important things. Because what Eyal brings you that are very, very important and are much more convincing and much more credible as to why it is true that Trump will actually be elected, and the two good mechanisms. Firstly, because the opening government itself give a concessions, quote, they see it as if the Trump administration did it, and then the US government will pay those compensations, which was an action that didn't represent the citizens of the country. We think their concession put them already in a problematic state where when they say to us that actually when Trump did it and not the whole citizens, that means that all of the citizens doesn't feel that they actually did it, so they don't need to pay for this specific thing. And note also that OO didn't even bother to use this mechanism against them, and this is come specifically in us. Secondly, we say today there are a lot of countries and there are swing states, and we are the only group that has addressed that. Why is this crucial? Note that a lot of people who were sworn Republicans stopped voting for Trump because of the disasters it caused them, because of the huge wave of death that's happening because of the corona. These things were so extreme in their severity that they made people who had voted for the Republican Party for many years literally vote for Biden after that. Why is this thing crucial? Exactly the people who are still today discussing with themselves whether it was smart that they voted for Biden, whether it was okay, whether it was a smart move. They are also likely to feel cognitive dissonance with themselves after they have voted contrary to what their family has voted for them for years. What is this means? That everything Biden does in the most explosive is the most explosive thing in the world. This means that anything like this, which goes against the agenda of a lot of the Republicans, is likely to make them think straight to themselves. We were wrong. We should not have deviated from what my family pointed out, because in a moment, there are probably a lot of questions marked to themselves. And the Democrats that CG is talking about are just going to vote for the Democrats Party in both words, because no person who voted for the Democratic Party is going to vote for Trump, because it probably symbolizes for him an extreme example of the rival party. So why is this mechanism the most important thing in the debate? because even if the mechanisms of the OO are true about hatred of immigrants, it is not clear to us. It is not clear to us why this hatred of immigrants is so important, why this is the tipping point. What we preview, we preview that because Trump's re-election depends on these specific swing states, because all of the election based on these specific things is simply the most likely mechanism, the most important mechanism in this debate. Please oppose the motion. Thank you.